Can the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia keep it together? Change has become increasingly bloody, it seems, since the 2012 death of longtime leader Meles Zenawi. Meles, a Tigrean whose home region is now in open revolt against the central government. There, conventional fighting is morphing into guerrilla warfare, with reprisals against civilians that are fueling a vicious circle. Elsewhere, regional and ethnic tensions are also on the rise. In the middle of it all, Prime Minister Abiy is on the campaign trail ahead of June general elections. The poll was originally scheduled for last August, but delayed due to COVID. We'll ask about the viability of the vote in conflict areas and whether the election will bolster or undermine the legitimacy of a leader who won the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize for bearing the hatchet with neighboring Eritrea, but who has since struggled to live up to his billing as a reformer and a reconciler. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking which way for Ethiopia. Joining us from Woodbridge, Virginia, just outside of Washington, Meles Zenawi of the Global Ethiopian Advocacy Nexus. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, France 24, for giving us this opportunity.
And not too far away, across the Potomac in Washington, D.C., Tigrean researcher and activist Meles Zenawi. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
From New York City, Henok Gabiza, former president of the Oromo Studies Association. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
And with us here in the studio, Roland Marchal, a researcher at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po's CERI research branch. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. By the way, happy Orthodox Easter celebrations over the weekend in the ancient city of Lalibela, world famous for its rock-hewn churches. This year, fewer pilgrims, though, because of COVID, yes, and also because of the conflict further to the north in Tigray.
We're going to pray about the war in the country, the hunger in the country. The curse from God is getting worse. We pray to God to bring these things to an end.
Meles Zenawi, what does he mean when he talks about a curse from God?
Well, considering the many challenges converging in Ethiopia, locusts, unprecedented locusts, climate change, conflicts going on in many regions. I believe those who are faithful would consider this as a curse from God.
Your thoughts on where Ethiopia is today, 1 month again ahead of those elections?
Well, there are many challenges, as you know. In Ethiopia, there is conflict in Tigray. The government is trying its best to stabilize and rehabilitate Tigray. And there are ethnically related conflicts in various parts of the country due to 27 years of an ethnic federal system and a very toxic narrative that pits one ethnic group against the other. Despite all these challenges, majority of Ethiopians want to have peaceful and free elections, and they want to transition towards democratically elected government. Currently, there are over 47 both national and regional parties, organizations contesting the elections. They are competing, and as you know, there were 5 elections under the domination of the TPLF EPDRF regime, and this one, with all measures, is relatively competitive and relatively free, if not absolute, than the hitherto held elections, which are sham elections, won by the TPLF-dominated EPDRF at 100%, which was ridiculous and preposterous.
But they say they're not ready for those elections, that half the voter rolls have not been updated.
People are registering. I know that in the Oromia region, over 12 million people have registered. In Amhara region, over 5 million. In many other regions, there are registration going, of course, in Tigray and some parts of Western, Eastern Oromia, like Wolaga, due to the security situation, people are not registering. But for the most part, people are registering, and the government and the National Election Board is urging Ethiopians to register.
Meazagide, your thoughts on where Ethiopia stands now and where Tigray stands now?
Yeah, thank you so much. Ethiopia, for all technical and practical purposes, is a failed state right now. We're talking about a regime that is ultimately confined to Addis Ababa without any legitimacy, capacity, or authority to govern the entire country. There is an active state-sponsored genocide happening upon the people of Tigray in Ethiopia. What's happening in Tigray is not just a conflict, it is an active state-sponsored genocide whereby the Ethiopian government and foreign forces, particularly the Eritrean government, and also internal militia forces from Amhara region are actively massacring innocent Tigrans in the dark. So this is what's happening in Ethiopia, and there is no talk of election because all of the dominant and viable candidates or opposition political leaders are either arrested or massacred or killed. You have a prominent political activist and politician from the Oromos, particularly Jawar Mohammed, Baqqala Garba, and others in jail. And you have members of the TPLF, a political party that is resoundingly supported by the Tigrean people, fighting, trying to defend its people and its territory. So the talk of election is laughable. It is something that is being done in order to further legitimize the genocidal regime that is now confined only to Addis Ababa, the capital city of Ethiopia. Other than that, no one is really registering all the numbers. Mr. Naaman was mentioning these are numbers fabricated by the Ethiopian government and its cronies in order to confuse the international community to believe that things are well and fine in Ethiopia and that there might be a glimpse of election, but that's not true. People are actually protesting. Most of the important and political parties with an alternative policy have actually protested the upcoming election. And Ethiopia, for all purposes, as I said, is a fragile and a very failed state.
You heard Naaman Zeleke talk about 27 years where it was, as he put it, minority rule. But do you get the sense that there is this feeling of that there are people who want revenge?
People like Mr. Naaman Zeleke do indeed want revenge, but that revenge comes from the notion that TPLF, alongside other political parties in Ethiopia, have instituted a political system and a constant arrangement that enabled minorities and majorities to coexist. People like Mr. Zeleke have been preaching for the extermination of the people of Tigray for over 10 years now. So they have been calling for that, and the revenge comes from that narrative, a narrative that says Tigrans have wanted to be, the chosen people in Ethiopia. We have never
That's a strong charge.
That's not what happened.
Calling for extermination. That's a strong charge.
This is serious.
It is, and it's something. It is something I can. It's something I can. If I may finish, it's something I can back with an evidence. Mr. Malik.
One at a time. First, may
no,
I ask?
Mr. Selek. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. If I may just finish, it's not just an accusation, it's something that we can back with an evidence. Mr. Zeleke was a head of a TV station in 2016 that clearly called for the extermination of the people of Tigray. They say the people of Tigray are only 5% of the population, and it doesn't take that much to exterminate all of them. This is what they said. It's on record. We can provide you with the evidence, and you can see it for yourself. So we're not just making accusations, we're actually stating facts. Fact is that Mr. Zeleke, the TV station that he was heading, called ISAT, has been propagating for the past 10 plus years. So Mr. Zeleke was also in Eritrea not long ago, working with the Eritrean government to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ethiopia. So the things we're saying are not things that transpired in November 4th, but these are things that people like Mr. Zeleke have been working for over 10 years now.
Naaman Zeleke?
Yes, Maaza, she knows deep down her that she's telling lies, gross misrepresentation of our positions. I have struggled for democracy and human rights for 27 years against what all objective analysis, both Ethiopian and non-Ethiopian, Europe, America, and all institutions, held as a highly repressive, minority-dominated regime of Meles Zenawi and the TPLF. And this is a fact that you can find in many studies. I don't have to say it. Now, what we say throughout is that this regime, under the veneer of a developmental state or a federal government, the real power resided under a minority TPLF, which dominated the economy, controlled for 40%. It dominated the security and the military command and control. 90% of the commanders were Tigrans, and this is a fact, and there are evidence-based studies. Now, this doesn't mean that we're anti-Tigrean people. Tigrean people are our people, they are our mothers, our brothers, and our sisters. But a cruel, quasi-Nazi, fascistic TPLF that claims to represent the Tigrans was
All right,
and unleashing human rights violations throughout Ethiopia, and it had instituted an ethnic federal system where it pitted each and every ethnic group against the other, and because of that, thousands of people have been massacred throughout their reign.
All right, so strong accusations.
Others were in torture chambers throughout Ethiopia, and these are facts which Meles would like to deny, unable to admit, and this has been her playbook since this conflict started.
All right,
on November 4th, Meles and her friends have launched this fake genocide.
Strong accusations there from you and from Meles. Let's talk about the present now, and we'll begin with you, Henok Gabiza. At this point in time, what do you do if you're the leadership of Ethiopia when it comes to Tigray?
So thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, I would like to say a few words about the political difficulty of the current Ethiopian situation. So all these chaos and messes, political messes that the country is experiencing can go back to the clash of political visions that exist in the country. We can sum it up into two main domains of clash. One, there are a group of politicians or a group of political elites who believes in bringing back the old Ethiopian way of centralizing and unionizing power into a single hand. And then there is a group of political domain that believes in the multicultural, multinational, and multi-societal background of Ethiopia, which is the reality. And the only way to reconcile these two visions is by coming back to the drawing board, discuss the differences, carve out a transitional terms that might be acceptable or at least less offensive to differently diametrically opposite political visions. Apparently, the Prime Minister, who is greatly inspired by the political vision of the Menelik, the Haile Selassie, from the time of monarchy, is obviously in clash with the reality on the ground. So the war in Tigray, besides some implication of revenge for the past 27 years, which could have been addressed within the framework of reconciliation and restorative justice, instead of pursuing restorative justice, which actually all of us were hoping when the Prime Minister came to power and made a moving speech in DC, in Ethiopia, in Mekelle, and everywhere, when people were so ambitious to believe that this is going to be a restorative justice, peace is finally coming to Ethiopia, democratic election is coming to Ethiopia. But instead of pursuing that original plan, the Prime Minister resorted to the idea of revenging what has happened in the last 27 years. Second of all, I am not exactly sure if the Prime Minister has the moral ground to even pursue revenge, because he himself has been part of the last 27 years of oppression. So if you ask me, the current situation in Ethiopia, the last 27 Ethiopia was mainly authoritarian regime that was at least trying to pursue authoritarian development agendas, which is not really happily welcomed by all. But the current Ethiopia is a country that is absolutely going back to the conflict zone. So Ethiopia is not anymore a post-conflict nation. In all honesty, in all fairness, the last 27 years with all problem of human rights record, all problem of political crisis, we can fairly conclude that Ethiopia was a post-conflict nation. But again, brutally authoritarian. But at the moment, Ethiopia is purely and squarely a conflict nation. When conflict nations are characterized by armed conflict, if you see the war in Tigray and the war in Oromia, where Oromo Liberation Army, who has been in existence since 1970s, with the hope of bringing a platform for the Oromo people to have their say in that country, because the Oromo people had never been asked in the history of Ethiopia about what they want in Ethiopia. There has never been an election. There has never been a referendum. So that's what the Oromo Liberation Army and the Oromo Liberation Front were established for and still doing. So all of these chaotic political crises added together are now leading Ethiopia into a clear path of dissolution, and even a violent dissolution at that. Nobody would like to see a violent dissolution in Ethiopia. So that's where the country stands at the moment.
Roland Marshall, you just heard there Henok Gabiza
Yes.
painted as a choice between the federal system or more centralized system. Is that what's at stake right now?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that we see very well, we could identify political elites who are pushing for a more centralized system, and others who clearly wants this federalism, this ethnic federalism, to move ahead and develop. And actually, some states are even going to be created. The problem is there is no discussion. And this way, I believe to a certain extent that we are still in a vicious cycle that started somewhere in the early 1990s, where people have a lot of difficulties to talk to each other about conflicting ideas about what the Ethiopian state should be.
Was there a window of opportunity to open that discussion in 2018?
I strongly believe that when the new prime minister was elected, there was a window of opportunity, not very long, for maybe a couple of months, where those kind of discussion could have been put on the table.
Now is it too late?
I believe that was closed by the end of 2018. And of course, as the international community took some time to realize that actually the trend wasn't exactly corresponding to what Abiy Ahmed said at first, and therefore this Nobel Prize. But certainly we see those authoritarian trends materializing in many aspects, including in his own Oromo state over the months and for quite some time. And this is certainly a problem that should be talked about. I mean, we could expect in elites to discuss those issues, but in Ethiopia it seems that there is a culture of top-down, and maybe there is a vision of the prime minister that makes all those this freedom of speech about important issue, about hearing conflicting ideas about what Ethiopian state should be, what should be development, and that sense that makes an agreement difficult. And I believe, like most of my colleagues here, that as well make the elections very perilous.
All right, we're going to talk about when we come back, and as well the implications for the region as a whole. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. 1 month ahead of a general election in Ethiopia that had been postponed last year. We're wondering which way forward for the nation, with that conflict in Tigray in the north, now in its 7th month. We're talking about it with Neamin Zelek, who joins us from Woodbridge, New Jersey, of the Global Ethiopian advocacy nexus in Washington, D.C. Tigrayan researcher and activist Meles Zenawi is with us. From New York, Henok Gabiza, former president of the Aroma Studies Association, and Roland Marchal from the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Last week, the United Nations talked of aid disrupted for many by the 1 million that have been displaced in 6 months by the conflict in Tigray. Aid agencies accusing forces from neighboring Eritrea. The French news agency AFP last week got access to Ethiopian government documents that accuse Eritrean soldiers of blocking and looting food aid, prompting this reaction from Asmara, a statement that was sent by email by the information minister. No way that Eritrea can block humanitarian assistance or loot them. Back in March, Ethiopia's prime minister had publicly distanced himself from human rights violations blamed on Eritrean troops.
The
Eritrean army crossed the border and was operating in Ethiopia. Any damage it did to our people is unacceptable. We can't accept this from them. We wouldn't accept it if it were our soldiers. Our military campaign was against clearly targeted enemies, not against the people.
So that was a statement from March by Abiy Ahmed. The United States last week calling for a cessation of human rights violations in Tigray, putting pressure on both Eritrea and Ethiopia.
We have heard the Eritrean government's public statement that it will withdraw its forces from Tigray, but that must still be implemented in practice. There is no evidence that such a withdrawal is underway. And any such withdrawal must be immediate and verifiable. We also call, and continue to call, for a withdrawal of Amhara regional forces from Tigray for an immediate end to the hostilities, all of which are critical to protecting civilians and ensuring unhindered humanitarian access.
Before we turn to the rest of the panel, Roland Marchal, so the accusation there is that there's the regular army from Ethiopia, the regular army from Eritrea, which came over, and then there are these militias. Who are they?
The Amhara militia and as well special forces, special police forces from Amhara state. And so there are, every state has its own way of managing security. Amhara state did this way. What is problematic for Abiy Ahmed is to have declared at first that it was an operation to restore law and order, and then to bring into Tigray a foreign army, because as far as I know, Eritrea is an independent country. And then, of course, we had many narratives, stories about human rights violations. Some maybe, again, that need to be cross-checked, but really the evidence has been mounting for months now, so it's very difficult to deny it. Another point that should be taken into account that may shed some light on the current situation elsewhere in Ethiopia is that Amhara militias took over land from Tigray to annex back to Amhara state. So I'm not going to decide, I'm not Ethiopian, they need a political arrangement, whether this land belongs to Amhara state or to Tigray, but the point is that doing so means that to a certain extent the internal boundaries of Ethiopia could be drawn in a new way as the crisis is unfolding in Tigray. And that's why you had incidents in other places in Ethiopia, and very serious incidents, not only, I would say, violent demonstration, but even armed clashes. And that raised as well a new issue that hasn't been discussed is Abiy Ahmed was very courageous, and I think we have to acknowledge that, in bringing back armed groups that were in exile in Eritrea, and but we know very well that when you bring back armed groups, you need a full process of you need a political agreement, and you need as well, I would say, ways to demobilize those people, to reintegrate them into the society. This has not been done very seriously because it's very difficult, first of all, and therefore that adds to the violence we see in certain areas, especially between Oromos and Amhara's state.
Nemin Zelek, your thoughts on these Amhara militias taking part in the campaign in Tigray?
Okay, before that, allow me to make 2 points because there was a rehash of another false narrative by extremist ethno-nationalists who are responsible for current violence in Ethiopia, especially in Oromo region. Now, there is no vision on the part of the PM. As far as I know, I've been in a position that struggled for democracy and human rights in Ethiopia for 27 years, as I said earlier, to go back to the past, as Mr. Debisa said. Now, the difference is there are some ethno-nationalists who have taken an extreme position and want to impose their will violently in Ethiopia, as is the case with OLF Sheni. As the commentator earlier said, sorry, I don't get the name, the PM has opened the political space, the media space, invited all opposition, including my group, as in the leadership of G7. They are operating now under a political party, IZEMA, and 47 others who were unprecedented during the time of the TPLF. Opposition groups are operating. The only problem we have is some ethno-nationalist groups who have a hegemonic agenda, who have a secessionist agenda, who have used the ethnic card.
So do you put these Amhara militias in that
yes,
category?
The Amhara militia, look, the Amhara militia is under the federal government. It is like asking the U.S. president, don't use the Maryland National Guard or Virginia National Guard when the capital was assaulted. So the federal government had to use the Amhara militia, the Afar militia, even the Oromo militia in Tigray because it was caught unprepared when the TPLF launched its attack, assault, a brutal assault to massacre 6,000 federal soldiers who were in Tigray for 20 years. So it had to scramble, including bringing forces as far away as from Somalia to deploy in Tigray. So it is the right of the Ethiopian government and within the sovereign rights of the Ethiopian people to use whatever force under its disposal to defend the sovereignty of
and bringing in Eritrean soldiers, bringing in Eritrean soldiers, is that a good idea?
Yes, I defend that. You know why? The TPLF raised 250,000 militia special force, prepared, well planned, coordinated attack throughout Tigray. They disabled lines of communication. They organized Tigrayan officers in Addis Ababa to disable the command and control and communication. They assaulted, massacred 6,000 federal soldiers who were protecting the Tigrayan people for 20 years. At this stage, the federal government was caught, as I say, unprepared when the TPLF assaulted on 4th of November. 70% of the Ethiopian army was in Tigray. 70% of its heavy weaponry was in Tigray. Everything was assaulted by the TPLF, multiple attacks at multiple fronts, and the Ethiopian government had to call on the Eritreans to get in because some of let me bring in at the border of Eritrea and Tigray.
Let me bring in on this, Meles Zenawi. Your thoughts on all the players that are present in Tigray right now.
Yeah, I am laughing because it's so sad. It's so sad people have to go such an extra mile to justify the massacre of innocent civilians, the raping and gang raping of innocent kids, girls as young as 4 years old in Tigray are being gang raped, not only by the Amhara militia.
One at a time, please. One at a time.
You never condemn 1,000 Amharas killed by TPLF.
Not only by Amhara militias, not only by Amhara militia, but also by Eritrean troops and Ethiopian national troops. It's also sad, Mr. Zalek is talking about sovereignty, while the very government that he's advocating for and supporting and is working for literally invited a foreign country, a foreign enemy, Eritrea, to enter into an Ethiopian territory and kill.
TPLF is working with Egypt.
And
All right,
kill.
one at a time, please.
Ethiopia.
Naaman Zalek, please.
Okay, I will.
Actually, I'm here out of the respect for the media. I am doing a disservice to my people that I'm even talking to a person who is justifying the genocide and the killing of the Tigray people. So it would be a courtesy just to let me finish my point as I was letting you finish your point, all right? You're an old person. You're an old person, and you should have some decorum and manner to let people finish their point when they're making their points. I was listening to you making all those allegations and lies. I listen because that's what adults do. They listen and they respond. So having said that, everything Mr. Zalek presented is completely false. The genocide in Tigray didn't start on November 4th, as the Ethiopian regime, as well as people like Mr. Zalek, would have the international community believe. The war started long ago, right after Abiy Ahmed was selected by the EPRDF. He forged a military pact with a neighboring country, Isaias Afwerki, and because of that, they have been working together to wage war against the people of Tigray. The Eritrean government, through its president, have been seen, visiting military camps, participating in all internal affairs of the country. And there was also a report by the European Union warning about a war looming. And this is mainly because they had, evidence showing Tigray being encircled, not only by Eritrean troops, but also by Amhara militia and the Ethiopian National Army. Having said that, what's happening in Tigray is devastating. People do not have access to humanitarian aid. 4.5 million people are starving. They're facing a man-made famine. And this is not just my word. You can look it up on the UN. These are reports from the international organizations.
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Do you agree with Roland Marshall when he was saying earlier how there is this age-old problem in Ethiopia of it's difficult to get dialogue started, it's difficult to have dialogue?
Yes, it's very difficult to have a dialogue because you have a regime that is hell-bent on, imposing a unitarist ideology. You have a regime that does not accept the difference people have, like political difference and ethnic, identity difference. The only way for Ethiopia to coexist is through federalism, a federalism that lets people to have the right self-determination and the right self-administration. So as long as, the regime in Addis Ababa doesn't recognize ethnic nationalities' right self-determination, dialogue is impossible. But the Tigray government has been calling for an inclusive national dialogue through which all political parties in the country would come together and have a dialogue and decide on the future of their own respective people. But when you have people that, call an entire region extremist only because we want it to be administered by people that speak our language, people that are from our region, how can you have a dialogue with these people? And
right.
It's because we have been pushing for an inclusive dialogue that we're being exterminated in the dark.
A week ago, the state-appointed Ethiopian Human Rights Commission spoke of an unnamed armed group taking control of an entire county in the same. This is not in Tigray, but in the western Benishangul Gumuz region. It's the same area that's home to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam project. And again, I want to put it to you, Henok Gabiza. You heard Roland Marshall talk about the fact that you have this sort of a knock-on effect from what's happening in one region, happening in another. At this point in time, how do you get everybody around the table?
This is actually the chance of bringing everybody back to the drawing board again is already a gone opportunity from what I see. The ship has already sailed a day or two ago because obviously the Prime Minister and his administration had decided to label and brand the Tigray Defense Force and the Oromo Liberation Army as terrorist groups. So once you make that legal naming, it'll be difficult to sit down at the table. So that's going to be a tough uphill battle that has to be known. To your question about the chance of dialogue, national dialogue, the prime minister himself had decided to just move away from that dialogue. Number two, I have been really listening to a very painful narrative from our brother Meles Zenawi about some of the points with regard to the Amara militia and related things. If you allow me to say a quick word about that. First of all, the war in Tigray did not start on November 4. This is a war that has been in the making for the last 2 years. The ideological battle started already in other regions, and Abiy himself was preparing, planning, coordinating, and mobilizing his forces from inside and from outside. And he was looking for the right and appropriate time. He was looking for the right immediate cause, which himself was part of. So that had to be known. And second of all, in the history of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed and people like our brother Meles Zenawi are the only one who invite foreign force to occupy the land of their own country and to take part in egregious violation of human rights, including rape against our mothers, our sisters. And that's a tragedy to watch. There can be whatever kind of political differences in the country, but that could have been resolved somehow within the cultural framework of the country. Number two, Meles Zenawi spoke about secessionists. Probably Mr. Zenawi might not have the legal knowledge or the constitutional knowledge of the country. If he goes back and refers to the Constitution of Ethiopia, Article 39, the right to self-determination, including secession, depending on how procedurally it was followed, is a fundamental constitutional right that should not even be derogated during the state of emergency.
So what are you suggesting? Are you suggesting, Henok Kabiza, that Ethiopia could be headed for a breakup like the former Yugoslavia?
All the facts and evidences suggest that Ethiopia is on a clear path to a violent dissolution.
Is that what you want?
Is this what we want? That's not what we want. First of all, the people of Ethiopia, including different ethnic groups, should be asked what is it that they want in the country. Never in the political history of Ethiopia had anyone been either through referendum or election asked about the political destiny. We were expecting that this current election, before everything went down the hill, we were expecting that it's going to serve the purpose of some kind of referendum, not referendum in the hardcore that we know it, but to choose between the force that believes in restoring the monarchical politics, and either to choose between the force that believes in multicultural and multinational federalism. Once Abiy knew how the political discourse was being framed, he threw into jail Jawar Mohammed, Bakale Garba, and OLF political leaders. So the chance of using this election as some kind of settlement is gone. And next to that, even outside of election, the possibility of dialogue, as I mentioned.
We're running short on time, and I just want to, before we go, I just want to bring up for our viewers.
Debate. I mean, I would not call it a debate. The same people who have worked to destabilize Ethiopia are given ample opportunity, and we don't get enough
Unfortunately,
time.
that means that we're running short on time. I just want to bring up one last point for our viewers, which is important, is that there are also tensions beyond Ethiopia's border. In July, the country is due to raise levels at the Grand Renaissance Dam, and that has Ethiopia and Sudan angry. Let's listen to Egypt's leader.
In the end, I'm telling you, and I'm telling our brothers in Ethiopia, let's not reach a point where you touch a drop of water from Egypt, because all options are open. All options are open.
We've heard a lot of acrimonious debate in this discussion, Roland Marchal, but there's one thing that Ethiopians all agree on. It's the Renaissance Dam.
Yeah, and
so could that be a convenient foil?
No, not enough. I think the issues discussed, and we have the evidence now with our three panelists, show that it's much deeper. It's about the nature of the Ethiopian state, and not so much about the nature of the regime, but really the nature of the Ethiopian state. And I think a lot of disagreements around the table that would need time. The question is why elections should happen at the moment, the country elites and political or intellectuals are so deeply and so bitterly divided. This is.
But it's a tricky one, right? Because if Abiy Ahmed doesn't organize the elections, he's accused of being a dictator. If he does organize the elections, he's accused of doing them in circumstances that are not.
It's a very good point. In the last year, when he decided to postpone the election because of COVID-19, many people in the opposition claimed that he needed time to organize his new political party, the Prosperity Party, and therefore postpone the election for that main reason. Today, people say, with good reason as well, that the country is not ready for election. The registration actually is going very slowly because insecurity plus reluctance of the people, and then now they are asking for a delay in the election so that things could cool down.
Right,
The problem today is we don't do anything. We just go to basically to hide the tension and to promote more. Well, when I say we, what I observe from the different actors on the ground. And I see an international community that is a bit lost, doesn't know what to do. Okay, there would be pressure, but at the same time, Ethiopia is such an important country that is required for regional order. It is very numerous.
Right.
So therefore, the international community is really hesitating on which policy to adopt in front of
needs to pressure all sides to come to the table.
Yeah,
we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we're running short on time.
I just want to say, we should ask Egypt, but as well Sudan. Never forget Sudan in the Horn.
Don't forget Sudan. We won't. Neamin Zelek, I want to thank you for joining us from Woodbridge, Virginia. I want to thank Meles Zenawi in Washington. Henok Gabisa in New York. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.